Hi, I'm Nicola and this is Word About Town, where we look at global issues in a Wollongong context. With the US presidential election only a few short weeks away, things are really starting to heat up in America. For Australians, the US presidential election can seem a bit confusing. Today I'm joined by US expat Rachel Reetis, who's from Ohio. So this is the second US presidential election you've been eligible to vote in, Rachel. How does this electoral campaign compare to previous years?
Well, I would say that this particular election has been very theatrical in the sense that there's been a lot of drama that has come with it. I also feel that this election has really just drawn on for a long, long time. I also feel that there's been a lot of mudslinging in this election, which there always is some, but I feel that this particular election there's been a a lot more than what I have seen in the past. Like with the Obama-Romney election back in 2012, everyone was debating about it on Facebook. But I really feel that the candidates this year are completely two extremes. They're so much on the opposite ends of the spectrum that it really does create a lot of tension between the citizens who have different viewpoints.
Okay. So you've actually been in Australia for the last two federal elections as well. How does our electoral system compare to that of America?
Well, when you say your electoral system, I have to be honest, I don't really understand it. But from what I've seen, I feel that your elections are much more, I don't know they're not as theatrical, they're not as dramatic. I feel that there's a little bit more pomp and circumstance, which I think would be something great that we could bring back into our election. Particularly this election would have been great to have had that, but I just don't feel that that is something we've had. But I feel that in the Australian elections, from what I've seen during debates and things like that, it seems that there's a bit more mutual respect and a bit more understanding than this particular American election.
So a big difference between Australia and the US when it comes to voting is that of mandatory voting. Of course, in Australia, voting is mandatory. You get fined if you don't. How do you think people not having to vote in America is going to impact on this election?
This is something I've actually thought about quite a bit. It's something that we really do differently than Australians. Why? I don't know. I think that all Americans, we do need to exercise our right to vote, and I think that it is important for us all to get out to the polls. Why it's not mandatory, I couldn't tell you, but I think the problem that I imagine that would be with the mandatory Australian election is that since people are being forced to vote, they're going to the polls uneducated about the issues, so they'll just vote for whoever, the first name they see, or they'll do what you guys call a donkey vote. And I think that's wrong because people, they're skewing the vote because they don't know what they're doing. But also it does force people to have to be more politically active and be more interested in the news and what's going on with your government. I do sort of wish that there was something a bit more like that in the United States, but I don't know exactly why people don't choose to vote. I've voted every single election that I've been legally allowed to and will continue to do so forever. But why people do it, I don't know. Sometimes I feel as though people feel like they've run out of options or they don't like the candidates, so they just say, oh, well, I don't like either of these candidates, plus my voice doesn't really matter much anyway. Why go out to the polls when, I'm not even going to be heard? So that's also a problem.
Speaking of that issue of feeling like you're not being heard, that your vote isn't important, the US electoral system sort of focuses on the state electing the candidate. So people vote for whoever they want, but in the end, the state decides who they're going to support.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think with that system, perhaps there's no real chance for third-party candidates? Is there any chance that someone like, say, Jill Stein can ever get elected?
Personally, I don't think so, unless they had the proper funding behind them. I don't know when the last, or who the last third-party president to have been elected was. That's something I would have to research. But from my whole lifetime, I've never seen anyone aside from a Republican or Democrat take the presidency. I don't necessarily think that our system, the way that a state has a majority vote, hinders that necessarily, because if you do run independent or for the Green Party, for example, as long as you get your name out there, I guess you sort of have an equal chance. Because we also have just a blank line, and we call that the write-in area. And you can literally vote for anybody that you want for the United States president. I could vote for myself, I could vote for Jesus, I could vote for SpongeBob or Snoopy, anybody. But obviously that's throwing away your vote. And it's not really going to have the popular effect that voting for a Republican or a Democrat would. And that's just because, from what I understand, we did start as a two-party system back in the 1700s, like a long time ago. And so I feel that that's still sort of just been something we've stuck with in a way.
So this election has really been plagued by scandals, first with Hillary and the emails, which are still being leaked, and then of course with Trump. Trump has put his foot in his mouth so many times, but recently the footage and audio in which he said some very misogynistic comments. How has these scandals impacted on how you see the candidates and how you think America is seeing the candidates?
Honestly, I feel like the majority of America doesn't know who to trust. A lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of friends from back home, they've said, well, they think that Hillary's a crook, but Donald Trump is a pig. So who do you vote for when you can't trust either candidate? I think that that's really sort of made people sort of have to compromise their values for the sake of our country. I did vote for Hillary. I have sent in my absentee ballot, and I'll just say that I have voted for her. I'm not ashamed to admit that. But she wasn't my first choice for the Democratic nominee. That being said, if the person I did vote for would have gotten in, I would feel like my values would not have been compromised at all in this election. I would have voted feeling completely like, yes, I know that this candidate is going to have my best interest at heart as an American, as a student, as a woman, and as someone who's abroad as well. So I just sort of felt that that particular candidate who I voted for in the primaries would have been the best at the time, but unfortunately he didn't have the funding.
So speaking of Democrat candidates who didn't unfortunately get the party nomination, Bernie Sanders was a very popular choice with young people. He really seemed to speak on issues that affected them. Do you think there's any foul play afoot about him not getting the nomination, or do you think there just weren't the numbers to support him?
Well, I will say I did vote for Bernie. Honestly, he was very popular because of his views, especially with education. One of his main goals was to make higher education completely free in America, which is something people in my age group really struggle with, because I know that education here in Australia is expensive, but it is even more so in the United States. So I feel that a lot of young people in my position heard him and they were like, wow, he's actually offering us something that we need, and something that could benefit generations to come as well. I could go on and on about my love for Bernie Sanders, but in terms of foul play, It's hard to say because there have been speculations about, oh, did he have the popular vote? Did he not? I don't know. I know I voted for him, and many people that I know did as well. I think there could be foul play because he was such a strong candidate. He was an amazing speaker. His policies were very progressive, and I really did love what he had to say. But as I said, his campaign, well, I didn't say this, but his campaign was sort of self-funded or crowd-funded, which was the first U.S. presidential campaign in history to do that. I did donate to his campaign a couple of times, and I don't know if he really, I know he generated the publicity for himself, but with Hillary having the backing of all those large corporations and things, I think that sort of hindered him from having that opportunity, unfortunately.
And finally, what's your pick for what's going to happen on November 8th?
Well, if I had to predict what I think is going to happen, I personally think, now I could be surprised, I think it's going to be Hillary. Because with Donald Trump's recent scandals with his footage of coming out and saying that he wanted to grab women by their genitalia without their consent and just randomly start kissing them, also without consent, that has angered a lot of people, as well as other Republican men who have come out and said, yeah, I'm not voting for this guy anymore. You should vote for somebody else. And for other Republican male politicians to come out and say that they are not going to vote for the Republican nominee, I think is huge. I've never seen that before, nor have I heard of it happening in our country's history before. So I really do believe that at this point, Hillary's got the strongest chance.
Great, thank you so much for joining us today, Rachel.